special Kotel edition of Shabbat Shmooze with Charlene, live from Yerushalayim. This week's Parsha is Parshat Vayeira, and we know that Avraham Avinu is waiting to greet his guests. The pasuk says, "Vayisa einav vayar vehine shlosha anashim nitzavim alav." If you break down the pasuk, it means, and Avraham lifted his eyes, and he saw, and behold, there were three men. Why does it say Vayisa einav and vayar? Why doesn't it just say one? It's essentially meaning the same thing. He sees the men, right? We learn from here something so profound, and I'm going to share a story that I heard from Rabbi Wallerstein, Zichrono Livracha. There, Zatzal, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. There is seeing someone. When you first glance at somebody, you see what's on the surface. But then, there's a second seeing of a person. It's when you get to know them, and you get to see beneath the layer that you see on the outside. There was a little boy who was in school, and this boy was getting picked on a lot. And the teachers and the Hanhala would notice that every time he would get called on by the teacher to answer the question, or his friends would say something to him, this boy would start mumbling something to himself. And this went on for a while. Every single time the teachers or somebody would ask the boy something and he didn't know, he would start mumbling something to himself and he would start talking to himself. So the administration got a little bit concerned and they decided to call in the boy's parents, and they said, "We think you might need to have your son evaluated because he's constantly talking to himself and we're worried that there's something wrong with him." And the family was so embarrassed and they were so hurt because they knew that he does that at home. They didn't think that he's doing this at school as well. So they finally decided they're going to get him seen by a top therapist. The therapist sits and meets with the boy and begins to ask him questions, and again he repeats the same technique, the same thing. He starts mumbling and muttering words to himself. After a few moments, the therapist notices that this is something very different. He's not talking to himself, he's doing something else. So she tries to really crack the code, and she asks him, "Who are you talking to? What are you saying? What information are you giving over or receiving right now?" And finally he opens up to the therapist and he says, "I'm not crazy. I'm really not crazy. But I'm going to tell you a story my Rebbe told me, and that's what I do every time you see me talking to myself. My Rebbe told me that there was a couple that couldn't have children for 15 years. And this couple went to Rav Chaim Kanievsky Zatzal and they asked him for a promise to have children. And Rav Chaim told them, while he cannot give them a promise, he can give them a bracha. But if they want a promise, they need to find someone who was embarrassed and doesn't answer back and go to that person for a bracha." So there's the woman who couldn't have children for 15 years, she goes to a wedding that night. And she sees that at the wedding, it was a very highly dramatic scene. The father and the mother of the bride had gone through a very messy divorce. And the mother was not even invited to her daughter's wedding. This woman who's struggling to become pregnant sees that the mother of the bride comes into her daughter's wedding wanting to dance with her daughter, and her ex-mother-in-law spots her and starts screaming at her and embarrassing her and berating her and belittling her. And the mother of the bride does not answer, and she's ashamed and humiliated, and she's kicked out of her own daughter's wedding in front of all the guests and in front of the entire community. This woman sees her opportunity to go get a promise that Rav Chaim told her about, a bracha. She runs over to this woman as she's exiting the hall, and she falls in front of her and she says, "I beg you, please, don't answer anyone, don't answer back, but give me a bracha to be blessed with children. It's 15 years we're waiting, please." And this woman who doesn't really understand says, "Oh, Hashem should bless you with a ben zachar," and she just runs off. The woman says, "Amen." Of course, we know how that story ends. Baruch Hashem, within that year, this woman and her husband, after waiting 15 years, were blessed with a beautiful and healthy boy. So this boy explains to the therapist, who thought he's crazy or he's talking to aliens or imaginary friends, he said, "I'm not crazy. But every time I get embarrassed, I daven for the people who are sick to have a refuah shalema." And at that moment, everyone realized that at first glance, this boy may have looked a little unwell or strange or bizarre, but in actuality, he was a giant tzaddik who was using his embarrassment as a tool to daven for those in need. From here, we take on an amazing lesson. Don't be so quick to judge. Lift your eyes and then see the person before you could judge the situation. Because you never know, it might look totally crazy and weird on the outside, but it might actually be something really beautiful and incredible beneath the surface. Shabbat Shalom.